Hi, Mr. Munjal. This is Supriya Srinath from ET Now. Thank you very much for joining us. So just 3 days back, you said GST is a game changer and politicians should set aside political differences and come together to pass it. Now we give to understand by the most highly placed sources on both sides of the political spectrum that the GST is unlikely to go through. Your first reaction is the winter session is a washout. The GST seems to be the big casualty of a political hardening of stance on both sides.
I would actually quite agree with you that if we cannot get all political parties to agree on something that is assuredly known to be good for India, for Indians, for the consumer, for the citizen, for industry, it's rare that you find an initiative or a bill where there can be very little argument on its benefit to the entire system. It can help reduce corruption, it can help raise revenues, it can help streamline the system, turn India into a common market. It would certainly be disappointing if we cannot get this bill through, because this is not the end of the journey. This will only it is only the beginning of the journey. There's more work to be done before you can actually even implement. And even post-implementation, it will take 3 to 5 years for the full impact to be felt by the country and the economy. So it is, frankly, it's distressing. It's almost a shame that this is going around like a political football. And we cannot have leaders across the political spectrum come to an agreement on how to implement an important economic bill of this nature.
Indeed, you're using very tough words. You're calling it disturbing, you're calling it distressing, you're also calling it is almost shameful that something like this has become a political shuttlecock of sorts. Who do you blame for the GST not going through the winter session? The government or the opposition? I know I'm putting you in a tough spot here, but you're known as someone who speaks his mind.
My job is not to blame people, but I have to say, on behalf of all of India, of Indians, of Indian industry, that it is not okay to allow something like this to continue to drag on for years. And we've taken a decade to come to a point where it's actually looked like it was going to get implemented. It gets pushed further. It's not as if something might happen overnight, by the way, I have to tell you. But whenever you start, that's the time the benefit can begin to flow from there and hopefully continue over an extended period of time. Because when you talk of the improved GDP, annual GDP, it's not just a number. It means more economic activity. It means more jobs. It means more entrepreneurship. It means more revenue for the nation. And I think that's what India needs.
That's right. I mean, GST is not just about numbers. GST is a lot about compliance and transparency and something that you said in your opening remarks. But let me ask you, do you see this as a standoff on particular issues? 1% additional levy was acceptable. Putting the GST cap rate as a part of the bill, having dispute resolution within the council's ambit or leaving it outside to the court. Do you see this as a standoff on specific issues between the main opposition and the government? Or do you really see this as things boiling down to political prestige more than anything else?
So the impression right now is that it's not about GST. The impression right now is, while rates seemed at one point to be a critical discussion point, now that the report by the Chief Economic Advisor has recommended or suggested rates which are in line with what the principal opposition party was demanding, and by the way, a low rate which meets the full revenue neutrality is actually good for the whole system. It's good for consumers, good for industry, good for trade. So on that you can't argue. But since that is already recommended, any more argument now actually seems almost infructuous. You can't make out what this is about. So that's why I'm saying it defies one's understanding as to why this should be, in a sense, this should suffer.
What is most ironical is, and I think it's only fair at that point, what is most ironical to you, what is most ironical is that the government and the opposition agree on other bills, but it's the GST that they will not go through, let go through. I have a very blunt question to ask of you. Are merits of the GST so huge that the opposition perhaps doesn't want the government to leverage those merits?
I would imagine not, and I would certainly hope not. Because don't forget, this is a bill that was introduced by the opposition which was in government at that point in time. So their understanding of GST is complete. I would imagine the issues may have been raised, which are new issues to modify, which apparently I believe there have been modifications that have been done in each of the standing committees, the expert committee, as they've gone through both the houses of parliament. So that's what I'm saying. It defies one's understanding why this should be the case, and I don't think it's only GST. There are other matters which need to be taken up, because since the House has not really been fully functional, there is a lot of pending work out there. This vision of a global economy and a country which requires millions and millions of jobs to be created every year, a country which requires basic social amenities like education, healthcare, infrastructure to be made available for the nation. Our arguments should be on different points of view, on different issues, not on this at all.
Fair point indeed. I also have a very quick question to ask of you. Now that the GST is not going to go through the winter session, hopes will be pinned on the budget session of Parliament, and will the GST be pushed in February? If the GST were to be pushed in February, is it a fair assessment to imagine that the GST in India can be a reality only by October 1, 2016? And I'm, of course, being very hopeful, insisting here that it will pass through the budget session.
I don't know, even if the bill gets passed today or within this session, when the actual implementation would take place, because there are other things to be done before actual implementation. There is an entire network to be built. There is work to be done. Each state of India, they have to pass their own legislation. So it's not as if it's finishing up. And so I don't know which day it will get implemented, whether it's April or May or June or September. It almost doesn't matter. If it starts rolling, then it will happen. At this moment, the hurdle seems to be in getting this work started up itself. And which is why I'm saying I don't know if it comes through the budget session, so be it. But you cannot allow something which is entirely known to be beneficial. Nobody's actually pointed out anything negative about this bill so far. And that's why it's confusing.
Yeah, and that's a fair point as well. But, I think on that point, let's get in Dinesh Kanabar as well. And Dinesh, the breaking news on ET Now right now is that the opposition is united to stall the GST. It's not likely to go in the winter session, maybe in the budget session. And I think I want to take that same point forward that Mr. Munjal was alluding to. If this gets passed in the budget session, do you think October 2016 is an acceptable and a reasonable estimate? Or even if it's the budget session, it's probably another couple of quarters, which is March 2017, by which we see GST becoming a reality?
I would think, having regard to everything else which is required to be done, as Mr. Munjal rightly pointed out, October may be a bit aggressive. Maybe Jan could be a realistic date, and if it is Jan, why would we not wait till April next year to happen? But again, the point which Mr. Munjal made, which I think is critical, is we need to get the whole thing started. Once it starts, then it will take a life of its own. It doesn't matter whether we are 6 months here or 6 months there, because that's not really critical. I think apart from everything else which Mr. Munjal mentioned, one thing is that the whole world is looking at India and looking at whether we are able to carry the reform process forward or not. And GST is one of the single largest reforms which the world is looking at as to whether India is able to implement. So apart from everything else that we spoke about, that the entire contribution to GDP, streamlining, but it is really also a signal to the world that India is ready for reforms.
Mr. Munjal, Dinesh, the other point that is breaking right now. So, if people thought that there is a complete hardball, what we are getting to know is that the government has agreed to drop the 1% additional levy, but it's saying no to putting the rate cap in the Constitution Amendment Bill, something that the opposition wants very, very strongly, something that P. Chidambaram referred to in the interview with Supriya as well, I think 2 or 3 days back. So there is a little bit of reconciliation, but obviously it's not leading to any kind of forwards on this.
Both these issues were already there in the report given by the Chief Economic Advisor. So doing away with the 1% interstate sales tax and sort of not putting the cap in the bill itself, both of the things were right out there. I think the issue regarding there being a rate in the bill itself really sounds a little bit incongruous for a very simple reason that never do we have in any finance bill a rate. It is really a year-to-year levy, and therefore to bind the government and to begin to say that the rate is not so. Had the rate been an excessive rate, not been the rate as it has come out at 18% being the standard rate, then one could have gone back and said the rate is not acceptable. Once the rate is acceptable, I don't see really any merit in the demand to say that the rate has to be built in the Constitution Amendment Bill itself.
Right. Mr. Kanabar, hold your thoughts there. I also have your good friend, Mr. Satya Poddar, joining us on the phone line as well. Mr. Poddar, the big breaking news that we're putting out on ET Now right now is that the GST bill is not going to see the light of day, at least in the winter session, and its fate really hangs in balance as the main opposition and the government lock horns on this one. What is your first take? Is this the big sign of the reform drive being derailed? I'm going to come to the specifics on the GST in just a bit.
I'm an optimist, to be honest with you, and I don't think the delay beyond the winter session is going to be devastating for the reform process. The government is still going to push ahead for the reforms in the budget session. In my view, the GST in its current form is not necessarily that of the type that would have brought a huge improvement in the economy of India. It's a positive move, but not using the version that is enshrined in the Constitution Bill. If you look at the CA report is very categoric that if the GST is to yield a benefit to the Indian economy, the government cannot cherry-pick recommendations of one or low tax rates without broadening the base. Now, CA's recommendations fell in two categories, those which required an amendment to the Constitution Bill and those which could have been negotiated after the amendment to the Constitution. For example, he specifically recommended that the application of GST to electricity, petroleum, real estate and alcohol not be enshrined in the Constitution. And by the same token, he said that there's no need to enshrine the 18% tax rate in the Constitution. Those are issues that can be negotiated from time to time. Now, what the government has chosen is that to date, the government has not accepted CA's own recommendations for broadening the base under the Constitution. They still are of the view that only recommendation of the CA which will be accepted is perhaps dropping the 1% tax rate. Even on that issue, the minister has been not very explicit. He's simply saying that if the industry demands that the 1% tax rate be dropped, and if the states agree, then he's prepared to go along with eliminating the 1% tax from the Constitution Bill. But that's not a commitment. I mean, industry has made the representations for so many times over the past few months that please delete the 1% tax. But even as late as 2 days ago...
I'll have to come in on this one. Mr. Poddar, do hold your thoughts there. I also have a very special guest, Kiran Shaw, joining me all the way from Bengaluru on the phone line. Thank you very much, Ms. Shaw, for being with us. And our worst fears seem to be coming true because we at ET Now are putting out information that the GST Constitutional Amendment Bill is unlikely to see the light of day in the winter session. The opposition and the government are not relenting on this one. Opposition continues to play hardball, and it looks like it's going to be yet another session, many more efforts before the GST can go through. For now, it's a big no. How disappointed are you?
I think it is disappointing, maybe not surprising because of the way things were moving in Parliament. I think the opposition may think it is, taking a very, bold step, but I don't believe so. I think the opposition is almost scoring a self-goal. I think this is a matter that needs to be, pushed through as soon as possible. But having said that, I think the reforms process is going to move ahead. Yes, there is going to be a delay. And I don't know who is answerable for and whether the opposition is willing to basically, come to the table and sit down and work out a resolution that is important for the country. I think, economic development is an agenda for both sides. And it is disappointing that this kind of stand is being taken by the opposition. And I only hope that better sense will prevail.
You being an eternal optimist talking about a better sense being prevailed, but how disturbed are you with the political acrimony over economic decisions? I mean, whether it was the insurance bill, which finally did go through after a lot of backlash from the opposition, and whether it's a stand-up on the GST, how disturbed are you? I mean, Mr. Munjal was with us on the show earlier, and he said it's almost shameful at how much politics there is on economic decisions now.
Well, I think, the politics must get out of economic decisions. I think economic decisions have to be, discussed in a very, very different way. And I think they should almost split up the parliamentary sessions into economic sessions and, other sessions. And I really, as I said, I hope the politics out of economic decisions is taken out, because unless that happens, the country is not going to develop in the way we want to.
Fair point indeed. Let's take politics out of that. But how much of a setback do you think as far as the whole sentiment of reforms and economic decisions and robust decision-making is concerned? Is the message from India out to the investors and out to every stakeholder in the Indian economy at the end of the winter session going to be that legislative logjam is going to get the better of India's economic growth and progress?
Well, obviously GST was sort of held out to be the hallmark of economic reforms, whereas it should not be taken in that way, because I believe there are many, many other economic reforms that need to be, moved ahead with. And I believe that, it is going to happen. I'm sure GST will happen, although in a very delayed way, which is unfortunate. But I'm sure the government will move ahead with other economic reforms, which are also extremely important for the country.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.